So this is our final session, and we have Thomas Tommen today, who's going to be talking about the top 10 best practices for APM. And this was actually our most popular session when we had AppSphere in Las Vegas. So I am very pleased to introduce to you the very popular and excellent Thomas Tommen. He's a solution architect with us at AppDynamics. So welcome, Thomas. Thank you. Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you, Marissa. I guess I start. So welcome to the summit and welcome to Paradise. Paradise? Yes, of course. With AppDynamics, we just hit the easy button and we solved all application performance problems. Bloody marvelous. Okay, not so fast. Yes, AppDynamics is the closest thing to an easy button you can buy, but easy is a four-letter word. And application performance management, or APM, how we call it, doesn't lend itself to easy or simple answers and solutions. Ignoring this will lead to headache, to more work for your team, and eventually will leave value on the table. Even worse, you end up with somebody like me to help sort out your problems. So what's the answer if you do not want my ugly face on your doorstep? I have today 10 best practices. I call it actually the 10 commandments, which could really help. I challenge you to evaluate and consider each of these best practices individually, but also as a whole system, and how they could help making your APM solution more effective. The result will be a stronger start, better ongoing productivity, and first and foremost, greater application intelligence, which is what you wanted to begin with. And eventually you will have the confidence that you made a wise investment. Before I start, I want to show some legal disclaimer for your information. I guess you saw it, but I leave it a bit longer on so you can really absorb it. Eventually, some people will still sit down, so let's give them time. So, what's the agenda for today? I group these 10 best practices into 3 categories: people, product, and processes. As we heard, my name is Tom, and these best practices are based on 5 years working with AppDynamics, with many, many customers across all kinds of different industries. Consider these best practices not as a strictly hierarchical set or one has a priority over the other. It's more like a chocolate box which you get. You open the box, you read the content, and eventually you start picking out your chocolates which you like first, and you take them until the box is empty. These best practices are kind of your chocolate box, and you can pick and choose. Eventually, you have to empty the box. So let's start with the first segment, the people segment. As we all know, people are the foundation and eventually essential to all what we do. The people domain here really takes care of adoption and enablement. With AppDynamics and APM, we touch many roles and many users directly and indirectly. So we want to make sure, considering APM and our implementation, that we address everybody correctly, just so that it works. Or as I say typically as a techie, our technical problems are typically not the real problems. We can fly to the moon or the Mars or whatever. The real problems are actually have a human dimension. So for me personally as a techie, this is always the most difficult thing, to address this correctly and align the people with in the right way. So let's jump right away into our best practice number 1. Number one, set the APM strategy. Like Franklin Covey, the famous time management company, says for every 1 minute you put into planning, you get 5 minutes back in execution. Too often, unfortunately, I come to customers and they tell me, you know, we want to roll out the agent and that's okay. That is maybe a plan, but that's definitely not a strategy and definitely doesn't give you a complete solution. To demonstrate this, I know it's the last session, but maybe even there, I ask everybody to rise. Everybody, please rise. I have a little exercise for you to demonstrate this. Out of your seats, a bit energy into the room. So everybody close their eyes. Please, everybody close their eyes. And please point to true north. Where is north? Everybody close their eyes and point to north. Keep your eyes shut. Keep pointing and open your eyes. What do you see? Do we agree? Do we know where true north is? Do we have a compass? A strategy will be your compass. A strategy, sorry, thank you very much. You can all sit down. A compass, a strategy will be your compass and eventually point you to true north, that everybody walks in the right direction. A strategy eventually makes out of a tool, and AppDynamics fundamentally is a tool, makes a real solution. So it starts really with a strategy, or at some point you have to have a strategy. That doesn't mean you make a project 6 months, come up with a 500-page document. You start somewhere simple and small. Like always, you start somewhere. You can always add more later. We start with vision and goals. We need that our people have the same vision and the same goals, and that they walk in the same direction. If it's right, you can always correct. You have to set up plans and priorities. And eventually you have to align your different users and your different roles and everybody within the company, but eventually also you have to address the outside people. You address education, onboarding, rolling out the application. How do you do this? And you address, for example, integration at some point. How does AppDynamics talk with the rest of your systems? What gets exported, what gets imported in AppDynamics? How do you share technical data between systems? The software development lifecycle. What does a developer do versus an operation person? Who is responsible for the one artifact over the other? Who makes the dashboards? And what is also for me important when I come also to new customers, we all speak the same language. AppDynamics introduces approximately 10 or 15 words, which we really define in a very distinct way. You have to set this language correctly, that everybody talks about the same thing. Also, naming convention. What is a host? What is a server? How do we name a host or a server? All this eventually has to be in a strategic document. Obviously, you want to make this or share this strategic document, which brings me to our next best practice. Share the internal knowledge. The simplest way thinking about sharing internal knowledge is obviously a wiki. All my customers which take adoption seriously have an internal wiki. You have in there not just a strategic document, but for example, you have also links, external links to AppDynamics. Where is the support portal? Where is the documentation? Where is our university? Internal links to other knowledge resources. Internal mails to subject matter experts. You can share success stories. How do you make change management? How do you adopt a new team? What does it take? I want to have AppDynamics. I heard great things. So how do I get AppDynamics internally? Kind of an FAQ. More advanced, or not more, the other thing what some of my successful customers do is internal user groups. People meet once a month and discuss their project, their successes, what gave them grief, or how did they solve certain problems. I'm happy to join my customers when they do monthly user groups. Sharing internal knowledge. The top of the pile would be potentially a center of excellence, an APM. I would go I would aim bigger than just AppD Center of Excellence. I would do a APM Center of Excellence, where you pull together the experts and power users across the organization, and you look at new solutions. You look, how can you get the next steps? Explaining a Center of Excellence would actually be too much for today, but me or my colleagues are happy to discuss really these more advanced use cases with you at any time. The more simple thing, I want to go back. What could be part of a wiki is a playbook. That's real enablement. And that's a real-world example of a customer. Even though it's old, it's 5 years old almost, it's still valid. And I would encourage you to make playbooks for your own internal users. The question here was, I have slow response time, now what? You enable the customer or your internal user to really triage a problem. So is the problem on all nodes? Is it on all BTs? Is it eventually in some remote service or backend? And if it's not anywhere there, potentially it's somewhere in infrastructure metrics, and you go into CPU, thread pools, all the goodies, which we have then also. Let's go forward to best practice number 3. Define KPIs, key performance indicators. If you don't measure, you don't know your status. And even worse, if you don't know what to measure, you don't even know where to start. So know your KPIs or start defining them. Again, it's not the goal you get 500 KPIs and then you never track it because it's not possible. Start with 3 or 5 or 7, and if you're ambitious, start with 25. But start somewhere and look how you want to track the progress. It could be now contradicting that I have metric-based information like the KPIs in the people domain. However, this is just a reference point. The goal with AppDynamics is to have happy employees and happy customers. And the KPIs will show us if we are on the right track in this dimension. And that's why it belongs for me in the people domain. So the obvious metrics for us are business transaction response time, call rate, error rate. We will talk later about business transaction more in detail. However, what is important actually that there are business transaction response time, error rate, and load. It's not traditionally what APM does, CPU and thread pool and garbage collection and all this infrastructure stuff. For us, the main KPI is really the business transaction, and we will hear later more about business transaction. So that's a good starting point. If you get more advanced, you can make more business metric, and probably you heard already a lot about analytics, where we can all make this beautiful business intelligence. Even our core product has a capability to make business metric. What is the average truck load? How much items do you have in the cart? Stuff like this. So you can definitely go into the business-related metrics even with the core product. Let's go in the next domain, the product domain. And for us, Techie, that's an obvious one. We want to start there. That's the fun here. It's our new tool. We can play around. It's great. However, I not caution you, but I would like to remind you that for me, actually, when I met AppDynamics, it was a paradigm shift. AppDynamics does things differently than the rest of the world. That's why we are successful. That's why it's a great conference today. When Jyoti and Bhaskar, back in 2008, looked at the APM market, something was not adding up for them. And they came up with an idea, and eventually, like all great ideas, it looks pretty simple in hindsight. And I was thinking, why did I not come up with this simple idea? But it's always the same, you know, the simple ideas are the tough ideas. So AppDynamics is indeed a paradigm shift. So if you start using AppDynamics, or if you are using already AppDynamics, make sure what we called earlier time the secret sauce, make sure that you understand the secret sauce. What is the key ingredients of this great idea of Jyoti and Bhaskar? And for me to break it down, if I could name 3, it's really the flow map. and what it entails to create the flow map. It's the snapshot and eventually the baselines. If you understand these three technologies and how they are created, you have a good access to AppDynamics, and you can use it in the way it was intended to. Just to make it quick, the flow map is for me all about bytecode instrumentation and correlation and entry and exit points. We somehow start measuring, then we have an exit point, and then the next entry point downstream nodes picks it up and continues. So entry and exit point and bytecode instrumentation, eventually the business transaction are then part of this. The snapshots, because the bytecode instrumentation doesn't capture all the information, we have the concept of a snapshot, where we really give you all the low-level, method-level access to information of problematic transactions. We do this with threat sampling, so we look at the threat in fast intervals of problematic transactions and get so very deep, very fast, and in a very controlled way. And last but not least, the baselines, they allow us to trigger events. Is it a snapshot, or is it sending the information of an error somewhere to another system? Whatever event, the baseline allow us to trigger this, because baselines are no rocket science. What is baseline? It looks at the historical data, and that's what a baseline is. It just looks and aggregates historical information. And then it allows us to compare the status quo now to a baseline. And whatever the answer is, if it's positive or negative, we can trigger an alert. And last, what I would like to say about the product, when you have an existing solution and you replace it with AppDynamics, do not try or attempt to replace your solution one-to-one with AppDynamics. Often I see customers, I did it like this in that tool, or I did it XY in the other tool, and I want the same with AppDynamics. We have a paradigm shift, so we have to address and think about our problems in a different way and use the AppDynamics way. Not that you cannot do the other way, but the true value is actually you making the AppDynamics way. So without further ado, let's go to my number 4, and the first in the product domain. Go with the flow. What I mean here really is, how do we show, or how is the flow map looking? Too often I see customers avoiding large flow maps. They look complicated, they do not look accessible, they eventually even look noisy. We'll hear the word noise also later. However, the flow map is nothing else than your environment. If your environment is complex, the flow map is complex. Ripping the flow map apart into different applications, we have the notion of an application, makes it look simpler, but you don't necessarily gain something. Yes, the out-of-the-box experience is easier because the flow map is easier, but you're going to lose eventually somehow the end-to-end correlation. The flow map, the beauty of the flow map is it shows you end-to-end in one flow map what's going on, and you have everything at the fingertip, and AppDynamics provides you the means to slice and dice these flow maps. Just because the first entry screen looks messy, I always argue does not justify to rip it apart. Too often I see customers with like 70 applications and 3 tiers in each application. I would like it to see the other way around, have 3 applications with 70 tiers, because it gives you the big picture. Eventually everything is hierarchical according how you structured it, and you have everything at your fingertips. So the bottom line, it looks noisy, it's not noise, it's the representation of your environment. And before making too many applications and making small flow maps, I love this flow map. It's not even a big flow map, this for me. I saw way crazier flow maps, and then customer go away. Don't leave it, it's pretty nice. You can slice and dice. Leave together what belongs together. I talked about noise. That's noise. A lot of hay, and we have to find the needle in our haystack. And we are tempted, as I said, APM tends to have noise, always have, and you have to live eventually also with the ambiguity that you always have some noise. But just adding data adds, first and foremost, more noise. At AppDynamics, we want to show you information. More data does not equal to more information. It does not get easier to find the needle if you have a bigger haystack. And that brings me actually to the best practice number 5. Configure signals from noise. As an example, I would like to try to use here our business transaction. Our business transactions are the fundamental configuration artifact and the foundation of everything you will build in AppDynamics when you do it the right way. However, the business transaction lend themselves very easy to a lot of noise and a less useful display of information. Technically, a business transaction is just a filter. The agent observes incoming traffic, and based on the business transaction configuration, it separates it in different haystacks. And the goal with the business transaction definition or configuration, and think back to KPI definition or KPI discussion, what really matters? What does really matter for you? What keeps you up at 3 o'clock in the morning? Whenever you have a business transaction, I argue, where you do not have a direct alert to the right people, or not at least on a dashboard, it's not important enough for you to highlight or display it or proactively track it. So it's not a business transaction. A business transaction is not a ping or a heartbeat or changing the background color of your portal. It's the search, the checkout, the things which is critical for your application, for your company. Again here, I rather see 5 at the beginning, and everything else, what we typically do, we capture the most important 5, and the rest we put in all other traffic. Yes, that will be noisy. However, it still gives you insight. But let's make sure that we have the 5 most important from the get-go. Yes, if you're ambitious, again, you can make 25 or 75. You can make even 300 or 700. But the 700 auto-detected from out of the box, they don't serve you pretty much or not very well, because the auto-detection, again, is a great start, but it's very noisy. And your job, if you want to get the best out of AppDynamics, is tell the system what is noise and what is not noise. The system cannot really distinguish if the search is more important than the login or whatever, or the heartbeat. So make sure the business transactions are correct, and again, start small and go up. One important aspect, however, we do have limits everywhere in the product, not just the business transaction, everywhere, to avoid that noise, if noise is detected, that it explodes and basically becomes overwhelming. So we have everywhere limits in our product, as well as in business transaction. And customers are typically then, yeah, we have limits, and so we can adjust the limits. However, the limits for business transaction are reasonably high, so most of the customers, if they have a real good configuration, they don't even come close to the limits. However, be sure never, not just the business transaction, but in general, not to hit the limits, because as soon as we hit limits, the detection will be shut off, and we don't see it anymore, what comes in. So make sure the limits are not breached, and you will be fine. Talking about configuration, AppDynamics gives you a lot of options to configure your solution. Make sure you know them. It's not rocket science. It does not take 3 months to know all the configuration. However, because they're often generic, or they can be used in very powerful ways. And I would like to actually call out today the new feature, or the new features which we bring, the scope-based configuration. I have high hopes that this is one of the most killer features we brought in a long time to scope actually your configuration. This will, as I see it, this will bring you a lot of power. However, even in the existing product, even with limited scope, we have some scopes already now. There are lots of configuration APIs, so use them. As the example, what I want to bring here, what I mean, is health rules. While you have some health rules out of the box, they bring you a tremendous leverage of automation and so on. However, discussing with my customers, I actually discuss with them taking it to the next step. What I mean with this is, for example, you have for every one of your business transaction, like the middle column here, you have one health rule which is overloaded. So you don't just check one condition for one health rule. You check several ones. Why not? Errors, not just the response time, but also errors and calls and the amount of slow calls, for example. So each of your business transaction gets one of these health rules. So if it's critical or has a problem, you can forward it directly to the responsible team. So not everybody gets every alert, but very specific. What you can also do is the left and the right column, what I discuss is tier level health rules. On one side, we have more the application side of a tier, and on the other hand, we have more the infrastructure side of a tier. When you have for each tier now an own health rule, you have, again, very specific and distinct alerts to send around. And because it's not just the response time you're checking, it's also if you have too high load or too low load. If switch is not working, the load is disappearing. You want to be alerted on zero load or very low load eventually as well. And then the outliers like the slow calls and the very slow calls, if you suddenly have 10% of slow calls, you probably have a problem, etc. So the idea here is overload the health rules. And you see here how our generic artifact of a health rule, which is very simple potentially, can be very advanced and check multiple conditions in one go. Or we draw these health rules as traffic lights on a dashboard. This is a real-world dashboard for one of our more advanced customers. It's a large airline, whoever can think of who it is. And you see the very tiny health rules or traffic lights. Behind each of these traffic lights is an overloaded health rule. So it doesn't say just the average response time is good or not. It gives you way more at your fingertips. Just imagine how powerful or how advanced such an insight is when you have multiple conditions for each of one of these little traffic lights. But before we really even think about making a dashboard, customer tip, when I come there, typically say, you know, I want a dashboard. Yeah, but before we draw a dashboard, let's address the processes. The processes are basically the glue between the people and the product. And while I can say for myself, I'm not a process guy, they definitely help. My former boss laughs. They help a lot in some circumstances. So who in this audience think about security as something important we have to address? I think not everybody is honest about this, or I hope not everybody is honest about this. But we take actually definitely security or sensitive data very serious as AppDynamics. And this brings me to best practice number 7. Secure your privacy. Out of the box, as I said, we take it seriously, so out of the box, we do not display or capture any sensitive data. I have to make a disclaimer: if you log something sensitive in a log file, and we capture the thread dump who writes to this log file, of course we will display it. But probably then you should change your policy, what gets logged and what doesn't get logged. However, out of the box, again, we do not display sensitive data like credit card information or customer names. Sometimes we would like maybe not credit card informations or customer names, but maybe a customer ID is good enough. So what I would like to highlight here, secure your privacy, it's mainly two features. It's called the method invocation data collector and raw SQL. The raw SQL, it's what it is, what it says. When you enable the raw SQL, it captures the SQL as it was written to the database. Select record where name equals John, and you have the name, or where credit card number equals credit card number. So out of the box, we do filter these bind variables and just write the question mark. It's good enough for most circumstances. Actually, I would even argue you should never turn this feature on in a production system. There are too many possibilities that there is some secret SQL which exposes something which nobody wants to see. In a dev or test environment, however, it can be a great feature. Now you would argue, but I would like to see where name equals John or where client ID equals 5945. For this, we have the method invocation data collector. And in fact, I would encourage you to use them really lot and heavy. Not just it's the foundation together with business transaction for analytics. It also helps you just troubleshooting problems in the core product. You make a search, or a customer makes a search, it's slow. You would like to know the search query. A data collector eventually gives you the power to extract the search query. Or you would like to name the client ID. So you make a data collector on the method which invokes the client ID, or which contains the client ID, and you get your client ID. The method invocation data collector gives you a lot of power, but with this a lot of responsibility. So make sure not everybody in your organization can access the configuration of data collectors in a production environment. Typically only a select group can access the configuration, while making sure that nothing sensitive is extracted at runtime. While the rest of the user group or the users can actually access then the information collected at runtime. How we do this, we have a role-based access control, and in one of the next versions, it will be even more powerful than it's now, but in simple ways we can configure roles and groups and exactly say who has access to these potentially sensitive configuration items. The real advanced users, they would even kind of automate the role-based access control. There are many ways a couple of ways I can think of, which brings me to our next best practice. Number 8, automate. I worked once with a guy who said his engineers are the best, they are lazy, they automate everything. And I think that's very true. As soon as you make something twice, you should potentially thinking of automating it. First and foremost, the agent configuration, agent deployment comes to mind. Especially with large customers, we talk a lot about rolling out in a massive way, in an automated and massive way, agents. But even smaller customers, I strongly think, should automate the agent deployment, because it makes it so much easier when we have an upgrade or an update that you can also have the benefit of the new upgraded versions. I see a lot of customers still on old versions, unfortunately, because rolling out is such a big thing. And they made it once, and they stay now 2 years on the same version, and they do not get the benefit of our new product enhancements. So it starts with agent rollout automation, and our unified agent, while it's great and will make it easier, it will not substitute your agent deployment automation. The next thing, for example, is if you're on SaaS, we monitor your controllers, obviously. We need to know if your controllers are working. If you're on-premise, we cannot do it, so you have to do it. There are inbuilt capabilities out of the box for AppDynamics to monitor itself. So make sure you use these capabilities and you build even some alerting or whatever you would like to do around this monitoring. More advanced use cases. I have a handful of customers who do this. Bringing the configuration from a pre-production environment into a production environment. You can do this with the push of a button or the execution of a script or whatever you would like to do. It's not an inbuilt feature by now, but it will come, as far as I know. Read the disclaimer. So bringing the configuration in an automated way is definitely an example for advanced customers, how to make it easier, more consistent, your configuration. And last but not least, really an integration with probably you were with the ServiceNow guys or the Alpica guys. We have great integrations with these guys, which actually automates the information flow between systems. So all serious customers have in one way or the other an integration with other systems to automate this information flow. And this is not so much a mandatory thing, it's just typically it's just it follows automatically. But think about it if you did not think about it so far. Number 9, collaborate. One of our early customers said AppDynamics is actually a collaboration engine. Many users with totally different background are using AppDynamics. And sometimes if you are using AppDynamics and you don't know really forward or you have a question, you take a screenshot and send the screenshot to your colleagues in another team. What should he do? I'm sorry, but what should he do really with a screenshot? It's static, he cannot do anything. With AppDynamics, you can send either the URL, or we have also a feature called deep link. So you can use the one or the other to send active information if you want so, or the actual screen which you are working on to your colleague, and he can take your analysis from there. So it's ultra simple technically, but that's why it's more a process or a mindset that you can really collaborate with people you never collaborated so far. Because now AppDynamics gives you the same language or the same access to the same information, but eventually you analyze or people look at it differently and have different expertise. And as simple as just sharing the URL will help cross boundaries, eventually in silos, or just talk to another team member or another team. So, leaves me with number 10. Actually, I do not have a number 10. Because maybe you heard already during my speech, less is more, or sounding more clever is quoting Einstein, make it as simple as possible but not simpler, or reduce to max, or whatever you want to call it. That's why I leave out the number 10, because for me, I would like to reduce my top 10 commandments actually, so make it for you easier. In summary, I do recommend these 9 best practices to help with your AppDynamics rollout. You will have a stronger start and better ongoing value if you really consider them, and I challenge you to look at these best practices, think what you did so far, and how they can help you move further in your APM solution. Thank you very much. So before I go to the Q&A, I have officially 8 minutes and 22 seconds. I really ask you to give us feedback. Like always, that's also an AppDynamics mindset. We want to collaborate with our customers. We need your feedback. So if you liked it, my name is Tom. If you didn't like me, my name is Phil. So please give us feedback. Thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them if I can. I have a lot of experts who might help here. Sure. What is the biggest mistake what people do while implementing? From a technical perspective, but that's probably not the right answer. I would say, let me say then not in a technical answer. Eventually really thinking that out of the box is the solution. While it gives you a great head start, and it gives you 40% optimization of whatever you had before, or 60%, you can easily, when you consider these 9 best practices, you can easily improve to 70, 80, or 90%. Thinking that out of the box is your final state, I think is the problem. And then from a technical perspective, my pet peeve is really having small flow maps. I don't know why we break apart a system which belongs together into different applications and thinking we are faster, we are potentially not. So, and then definitely the business transaction. If you're serious, then you have to think, or my personal view is you have to think about the business transaction. And then again, just learning from there and continuing. The other way, it's maybe not a mistake and it's not a direct answer to your question, but what are impediments to adoption? For me, actually, it takes really an executive person who believes in AppDynamics and a techie who believes in AppDynamics. And when you have this constellation, then you have the best chance for a really great solution. If there is the one or the other leg missing, then you're probably humping away. But this AppDynamics cannot influence this, but internally you can influence this as a sponsor or as a technical champion. If you're a technical champion, look for a sponsor. If you're a sponsor, look for a technical champion.